Currently, the North American League of Legends scene, the LCS, is having a disastrous offseason that has some pretty wide-ranging implications that extend far beyond just North America to every region, and I would argue it extends beyond League of Legends as a whole. This is something that could affect essentially every esport. For those of you who have not heard what's going on, I guess we should start off just by talking about the news. Over the course of the past few months, but particularly this past week, there has been loads of announcements about all sorts of negative things for the LCS. In particular, the LCS broadcast crew is losing a lot of its talent. Phreak is retiring from casting, Dash was just removed from the broadcast team, and Pastrytime is also moving on from casting as the LCS appears to be trimming down to some sort of skeleton crew. Phreak announced his retirement a little while ago to move into game design at Riot, which seems like it might be a pretty positive thing for him, but the other two announcements were weirdly foreboding. Dash announced this past week that he was leaving the crew not of his own volition.
That was the saddening part in all of it, is that I wasn't spoken to prior to the news just being, delivered, like being told that this was what was happening. That would probably be the only piece in the whole puzzle that I think really eats at me.
His text announcement on Twitter stated that apparently the LCS has no need for a consistent host, which honestly feels like a bit of a slap in the face, considering he's done a really good job of hosting the league for almost a decade at this point, literally just winning the Esports Awards Host of the Year for 2022. When this announcement dropped, Twitter naturally freaked out with all of this news, and I myself started commenting on some of it, at which point Pastrytime chimed in, reminding us that he also announced his retirement a little while ago, and he specifically informed me that that move wasn't entirely voluntary either. You personally as a viewer might like or dislike any of these casters. The league scene has very strong opinions on who casts their games, but to see all of them go in the same offseason, not of their own volition, is a really worrying sign about how Riot is looking at the future of the LCS. What's made this even worse is the fact that Riot hasn't made any comment on pretty much any of this. They aren't trying to spin this in a positive new direction. It's kind of like they know that this spells doom and gloom for the league and they're hoping to just let the news cycle die out. And these announcements are coming in line with so many other negative announcements that keep on happening with regards to LCS franchises and League of Legends esports as a whole. At this point, there's almost too many stories to reference, but it seems as though every LCS team is scaling back operations for the upcoming year. Teams are getting hit with layoffs, and esports in general seems to be going through some sort of massive recession.
I feel like I showed up and first became aware of the esports scene in around, let's say, 2014. I was very confident esports was going up only.
Yeah.
Do you feel that way still?
No, not at all. Esports has never really made that much money.
But of all the news that's happened recently, I think the scariest thing that's come out is that Riot is moving the LCS time slot. The LCS, which has been broadcast traditionally on Saturdays and Sundays, is going to be moving to Thursdays and Fridays, which isn't that bad on its own. But on top of that, games are now going to be broadcast at 12 noon West Coast time, 3 p.m. East Coast time. That's also with the most important games being broadcast right at the start, right at 12 noon West Coast, 3 p.m. East Coast, which basically means if you are in North America and you have a job or go to school on the weekdays, you will not be able to watch the LCS anymore. Your domestic league is specifically not going to be viewable to you. This is obviously really frustrating to a lot of people who have rallied out quite a bit at how upset they are, and in general this move doesn't make a lot of sense. It appears as though Riot is kind of trying to make the LCS more viewable to European viewers at the expense of local North American viewers, but that's a really worrying thing to see. Traditionally, esports have been much more popular in Europe than they have in North America, and I can see why it might make a bit of business sense to try to cater more to those viewers, but I don't know if the LCS can survive without local North American American viewers and players watching. I mean, can you imagine if another sport did this? Could you imagine if the Bundesliga in Germany specifically scheduled all of its matches to be at prime time viewing hours for Brazil, because the only way that they thought they could make their league survive was with a strong Brazilian viewer base? That's the equivalent of what the LCS is doing right now in North America. Now, most people might not look at this and say that it's necessarily anything all that bad, because the LCS, frankly, has been due for some form of regression. Bluntly put, the LCS has not been putting forward a good product in recent years. There's not really any reason someone should watch the LCS. Of course, if you're choosing to watch the LCS, you aren't really seeing high-quality professional League of Legends, at least compared to the other regions and domestic leagues in the world, as we have seen consistently with all of the poor international performances that NA has given at pretty much every international event. The LCS also isn't necessarily unique in strategy or personality. There's nothing particularly entertaining about this league compared to every other, since most of the biggest names and most entertaining personalities in the region have opted for streaming careers rather than trying to go pro themselves. Really, the only reason anyone would watch LCS over every other domestic league that they have available to them would be if you had some sort of connection to North America. If you are from the region, perhaps, you might want to see the local North American players. They will not be the best in the world, but you might be curious about who the best players are in NA. Good luck with that. If you somehow didn't know, the NALCS has so few local players at this point, it's essentially a joke. About half of the players rostered by teams are not from North America at this point, and of the 3 teams that were sent to Worlds last year representing North America for the North American LCS, of the 15 starters, only 3 of them were actually from NA. Every other player was an imported talent from other regions. So yeah, the LCS has been in desperate need of some sort of revamp for a long time. And these changes, in theory, could be Riot trying to take the league in some sort of a new direction. But if that's the case, the execution that they've been giving has been entirely horrible, flawed, every bad adjective you can imagine. It's been an unmitigated disaster. And in my opinion, esports and League of Legends really needs to pay attention to the LCS, because in many ways, the LCS is the canary in the coal mine. So if you're unfamiliar with the phrase, before modern technology, people that worked in mines used to always take a small caged bird down with them, a canary, whenever they went down to work. This was because canaries have really quick breathing rhythms while also being really light. So if there were ever to be something that went wrong, like a carbon monoxide leak, the canary would die from carbon monoxide poisoning almost immediately. This could then serve as a warning to the miners that they were in serious danger, something has gone wrong, and they should all evacuate immediately, hopefully before any other loss of life, apart from the poor little bird. Now, I think the LCS is something that provides a lot of value because, in many ways, they are the weak link. The LCS is the canary in the coal mine that everyone should pay attention to, because if something goes wrong in esports, the LCS will be the first signifier to let everybody know. And God forbid, if the LCS dies, I think that's going to send everybody running for the exits. To better explain this though, let's go ahead and rewind a little bit and talk about what it is that makes the LCS significant in the first place. Esports has always had this big problem holding it back, which is that gaming has evolved way too quickly for competitive gaming to ever become a real thing. I think it's fair to say we as fans want to see gaming competitions with players who are just paid to compete professionally, the same as traditional sports. We want to see people who are able to devote their lives to their talents, giving us the most entertaining and intense performances imaginable. We love these games and love seeing how far they can be pushed by a human being, so in an ideal esports world, someone shouldn't have to worry about going back to work a day job in between tournaments. But for almost all of esports' 50-year history, that's always been the case. Competitors have rarely been able to make a real living off of just playing games professionally. For someone to make a half-decent income doing that just through competition alone, they would have to support themselves exclusively off of the prize money given out to victors at most events, meaning you would basically have to win every single tournament you attended just to pay your bills. Across esports history, there have been some people able to do that, but of course not many. most esports competitors have had to resort to some other form of side career to help support themselves. Sometimes that means having a day job, sometimes that means working as an entertainer essentially with live streams in between practices, or maybe running a website or some other related gaming business. All of this is largely because there's never been a true esports league that's been able to generate enough money to pay players for competing alone the way traditional sports do. Esports leagues have been set up many times over the course of history, and some of them have been really great competitions, but it's rare to ever find true year-long professional leagues that have been able to survive more than a decade. When people try to set up leagues, they always run into a litany of problems. Tournament organizers might run into licensing issues with a game's developers. They might struggle to keep an audience's attention with sequels to titles being released. Even in the rare circumstance where a game develops a pro league with players who are paid salaries and millions of fans eager to watch, it always feels like a matter of time before the ever-evolving nature of video games pushes this league out of existence. This has always kept professional gaming from ever really being professional. It's always been more of a niche hobby than a career. This has always been a really frustrating, ever-present problem in esports, and it's what the LCS model was finally able to change.
Today is the day, the official start of the League of Legends Championship Series. This is a groundbreaking moment in league history as 8 North American teams take their first steps on the way to the Summoners Cup.
The LCS model was meant to solve all of this, structuring league esports like a true sports league. 8 teams, eventually expanding to 10, would play in a yearly seasoned competition, same as any other traditional sport, with a regularly structured playoff crowning champions at the end. Players were finally guaranteed salaries just to play the game, no more worrying about being an entertainer on the side to actually make a living, or having to retire if you don't win enough prize money from your next event. Fans could be certain of when and where to watch their favorite teams play, with regularly scheduled programming that was easy to find and follow. And to finish it all off, of course, there was still a major international event at the end of every year, which would pit the best teams from every region against each other to crown a world champion in a big celebration of all the competition year-round. Now, this structure was not perfect. Make no mistake, it had many flaws. There were way fewer international competitions occurring compared to the previous open circuit, which wasn't super enjoyable since League had really become a global esport already. Regular season games were also way less meaningful than tournaments of old, since losing a single tournament didn't automatically end an organization's existence or players' careers the way it did before, which was obviously pretty shitty for players, but it admittingly brought a lot of exciting stakes to previous events. And lastly, most of the domestic leagues across the world in the LCS model's first few years always seemed to see the same few teams winning every single split, never really being all that competitive, which made leagues feel pretty predictable and somewhat boring. But the LCS model provided stability, which was something that esports desperately needed. Having a centralized league meant we could finally build some infrastructure that could last for decades to come. One centralized league meant a central authority to negotiate and sell ad space on broadcasts. It meant a single monolithic entity that could negotiate multi-year deals for hundreds of hours of airtime. This sort of thing is a huge source of revenue in traditional sports, and now with the LCS model, we finally had an opportunity to bring it to esports. Of course, we call it the LCS model, but it really isn't unique to North America. It spans globally, as every region around the world has now set up their own domestic year-long league to build their own infrastructure. Each league has been able to collectively work together to create content with teams and players, building a brand on what they want to be, attracting advertisers and hype surrounding their specific league, and maybe most importantly, each region now has an opportunity to sell their broadcasting rights. The number one source of revenue for traditional sports has always been the collective broadcasting rights that a league will sell to a variety of TV networks. These deals normally last for decades and can be worth multiple billions of dollars. That kind of long-term financial infrastructure is what the world of esports desperately needed, except that's also when everything started falling apart.
One of the reasons why traditional sports is a little, not recession-proof, but a little more recession-resistant is because, you have organizations like the NFL that have long-term, multi-billion-dollar broadcast deals that feed most of the teams, even if they're not filling stadiums. Is there a future you see with esports where that's going to happen?
I'm probably more of a negative Nancy when it comes to this, but I think media rights are worth zero. Right? Like, zero is probably hyperbolic, but it's not worth anything, right? There's only a couple players out there, and they're not looking to bid a lot of dollars for this stuff.
It turns out streaming rights are worth next to nothing, at least compared to television deals. YouTube and Twitch aren't paying out billions of dollars to broadcast the LCS. Every league found this out as they began negotiating deals with their own domestic streaming services. No broadcasting rights meant relying more on sponsorships, but State Farm halftime shows can only pay so much. So that means teams relied more on individual sponsorships, individual ad impressions, individual streaming numbers, and before long we're back in the old system of teams caring more about promoting themselves as a brand or a company than they actually care about competition. What was really interesting about this model was the fact that everybody suffered from these problems, even the best teams in the world and the ones that consistently saw the most success. For most of League of Legends history, South Korea has been the best region in the world, and its domestic league, the LCK, has been the best competition. Everyone was reminded of this at 2020 Worlds when Korea had two of its top teams fighting in grand finals to win their 7th Summoners Cup, giving them more world championships than every other region combined. But even with all of that success, this past offseason, the LCK has been losing sponsorships. Even the best region in the world, with all of their titles and glory, are struggling financially right now. Former LCK commentator and player Cloud Templar highlighted this very potently on a stream recently, where he went so far as to say, after the World Championship, the LCK this year spent so big that if we didn't do well at this year's Worlds, it would have been a crisis. The LCS model has brought a ton of success and stability in the world of professionalizing esports, but recently it started to look like this might just be a house of cards that's about to come tumbling down. That's what's so worrying about Riot showing signs of restructuring the LCS, and why I say it's a canary in the coal mine, because if the LCS, League's weakest link, begins showing signs that something is seriously wrong, you need to fix that carbon monoxide leak ASAP, because if it dies, that's going to send everyone else running for the exits. The prospect of that happening makes me unbelievably sad, because I have spent the past 10 years of my life following these stories for a professional career, and being someone who is also a pretty big traditional sports fan, I can say with confidence that these stories and these players are no less impressive or less deserving for all of the incredible accomplishments they achieve. These players are doing incredible things and taking insane risks for their careers. They work harder than most athletes do and get rewarded so much less as it is. They're putting every waking moment of their lives into this game and deserve to have their accomplishments put on stage with their stories shared across the globe. Personally speaking, I think that a lot of the players and stories in esports, and specifically in League of Legends in these past 10 years, are unbelievably exciting, and they should be given an even larger stage. I would be heartbroken if we went back to perpetual niche status, where the only people that could even have a semblance of a professional career is someone who goes off and wins literally every tournament they attend. The LCS model may be broken in many ways, and it may need to change. It may need to reinvent itself or do something to keep itself around, but I really hope that it sticks around and that we continue having these opportunities for players to continue dedicating their lives to competition, because that's what, I mean, that's when sports are at their best. Now, thankfully, I think there is a little bit of a silver lining here. Recently, the CEO of Genji, Arnold, mentioned with a comment about the LCK losing sponsors that the one nice thing about the situation right now is that at least everyone's on the same page that something needs to change. Travis Gafford also put out a great video recently, linked below, talking about how Riot doesn't want the LCS to die. They are not intentionally trying to kill the league.
It would be very damaging for their ego if the sport that takes place across the street from their headquarters dies in the home region of the company. Like, that is not something that they are down for. They would not allow for that to happen without putting up a fight. They wouldn't choose to just be like, fuck it, let's move on from League of Legends.
As much as the LCS and Professional League esports model probably does need to change if it's ever going to survive, there is will for change to happen. I guess in a worst case scenario, even if the LCS does continue to lose viewership, and if all these changes are for the worse, and we continue seeing things go downhill until there's some sort of eventual closure and a return to an open circuit tournament format, I guess even in that scenario, we can take solace in the fact that there's always going to be competitors out there eager to compete, and the scene is rife with all sorts of talented people who are eager to put on tournaments, eager to help people find careers here, and hopefully eager to share these stories with everybody, because there really is a lot out there, and I think it deserves a stage. On that note, though, I hope you guys enjoyed your holiday season. I will be back with a new documentary soon, but until then, thank you very much for watching. Good luck in solo queue, and have a wonderful day.